Hey guys, tonight we drift gently into a misty morning where a fight was supposed to happen, but never did. A duel, to be precise. One set to decide honor, lineage, and all the dramatic weight that a good samurai standoff could carry. But fate, as always, had different plans. You are standing in the damp courtyard of a dojo that smells like pine, sweat, and old grudges. The air is thick with anticipation, but also with something else, something softer, heavier. A storm is coming, though you don't know it yet. You hear the soft slap of your sandals against stone as you walk toward the training grounds. The mist curls around your legs like a cat that knows secrets. Bamboo stalks lean slightly in the morning breeze, whispering things that sound like warnings, or gossip. You pass a peach tree. Someone carved a heart into its bark years ago. It still bleeds sap. Two names echo in the village like a song everyone pretends not to hum, Rinsook of the Western Wind and Takamura the Crane Blade. You haven't seen them yet. Not today. But you know their stories. Everyone does. They're the kind of men who make children stare and old women shake their heads like TSK, boys with swords again. Their feud isn't new. It's marinated in decades of family slights, spilled tea, stolen haiku, and that one unforgettable incident at a temple that nobody agrees on. You arrive just as the dojo's main doors creak open. An old man, probably older than logic, nods at you. He's sweeping nothing in particular, but his movements are graceful. You suspect he could kill a man with a feather. Or a ladle. He hums something off-key. You nod back. The ritual begins. You find a spot beneath the overhanging roof tiles, joining a handful of others who came early. Some were their clan's crest. Some were sandals with holes. One guy brought a folding chair, which feels both clever and wildly disrespectful. Historians still argue whether this was meant to be a death match or simply a demonstration of mastery. There's paperwork for both. But one thing's clear, it was planned with the weight of ceremony, the kind of thing emperors might idly mention between sips of tea. Even if blood wasn't guaranteed, reputations were on the line. Maybe even futures. You chew a piece of pickled plum someone handed you. It tastes like regret. Maybe excitement. Suddenly, a loud crack, a shurnai being tested against a wooden post, snaps the hush. The air holds its breath. You shift your gaze toward the edge of the training yard. The silhouettes are coming. Two of them. Not speaking. Not looking at each other. Just walking. Each carries a sword so elegant it makes your ribs ache. You feel it now, the promise of violence. Or beauty. Or both. That's the strange thing about samurai combat. It's not always about killing. Sometimes it's about almost killing. About showing you could, but choosing not to. Like when you pause just before breaking the last piece of porcelain in your ex's favorite tea set. Hypothetically. The crowd starts to grow behind you. The sound of whispers and rustling sleeves builds like a river before a waterfall. One child tugs on his father's robe and asks if samurai ever cry. The father says no, but you notice his eyes dart sideways. He's probably wrong. No one knows exactly why the day was chosen. The imperial calendar had a few open slots between tax audits and full moons. Still, it's odd. The weather forecast, if such a thing could be divined from bone readings and dog behavior, was uncertain. Even now, clouds huddle at the horizon like nervous monks. You close your eyes for a moment. Inhale. The sharpness of pine. The salt of distant sea spray. The faint, yeasty promise of dumplings steaming in someone's kitchen. You probably won't survive this, if things go sideways. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. I love knowing where all my sleepy history travelers are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun pushes through the clouds just enough to cast long shadows across the dirt floor. And somewhere, a bird calls out, sharp and sudden, like a sword unsheathing. The duel hasn't started yet, but you're already in it. You spot them more clearly now, Rinsook and Takamura. Neither speaks, of course. Not to each other. Not yet. They move like two thunderclouds circling the same mountain, both dignified and incredibly moody. One walks with the slow, liquid grace of a dancer, the other is stiff-backed, like someone who has something to prove and doesn't know how not to. Rinsook is the younger one, barely 30, with hair that somehow always looks like it was styled by wind. People say his sword technique was inspired by falcons, though others insist it was just a result of skipping footwork practice and hoping for the best. His armor is understated, matte black, minimal ornamentation, except for a subtle crest, a curling wisp, meant to symbolize wind but resembling an eel if you squint. Takamura is older, seasoned like dried fish. He walks with a limp earned on the northern border, legend says from a Mongol arrow, though one of his former students claims it was a goose-related incident. His robes are pale gray, embroidered with cranes, and his daisho is antique, passed down 7 generations and sharpened to a whisper. Their paths were destined to collide. Both were born into respected martial houses, both obsessed with precision, both allergic to compromise. And unfortunately, both fell for the same poetry instructor at court about 10 years ago. A woman named Kene. She now lives quietly in a mountain village, where she raises silkworms and absolutely refuses to comment. You can feel the tension long before they draw steel. They're not just fighting for reputation. There's history beneath their eyes, old wounds stitched with pride and salt. You watch as they take their positions, 20 paces apart, and begin the slow ritual of acknowledgement. The crowd holds its breath, collectively unsure if this will end in blood, tears, or haiku. A servant steps forward to present the ceremonial sake. This is tradition, but also theater. Each combatant takes a sip, though Rinsook flinches slightly at the bitterness. You suspect he doesn't drink often. Takamura, on the other hand, downs his with the enthusiasm of a man who's been married twice. There's a formality to what comes next. You notice how both men slightly adjust their grip, left thumb just under the tsuba, index finger curled like a question mark. Their sandals dig subtly into the earth. Historians still argue whether samurai like these truly intended to kill during such duels or merely sought the edge of perfection, the moment before action, never cross. The tension isn't just theatrical. You can feel it ripple through the observers. Even the snack vendor stops fanning his dumplings. A nearby monk clutches his prayer beads so tightly they leave marks in his palm. One young samurai apprentice whispers, "I heard Rinsook once cleaved a melon in midair." His companion replies, "That was a cantaloupe and it was already soft." The two duelists bow, not low, not deep, enough to acknowledge the gravity of the moment. Their eyes meet, and in that glance, decades of rivalry, training, betrayal, admiration, and unresolved poetry assignments pass between them. And then, they draw. The sound is different than you expected. Not the dramatic shying of movies, but a soft, controlled hiss. Like silk being torn under tension. Their movements are fluid, too fast to track but too deliberate to be random. You sense they're testing each other, feinting, measuring distance, mentally calculating who will blink first. And you, lucky you, are right there at the edge of it all. Not a participant, but certainly not a stranger anymore. It's in these moments, before the real violence begins, that you understand the philosophy that guided them. The idea that life and death weren't opposite ends, but two strands in the same silk cord. That to hold a sword was to accept mortality, not just others, but your own. You shift your weight, suddenly aware of how loud your own breathing sounds. Someone coughs. A crow circles overhead. The duelists pause. Just for a breath, maybe less. And then, well, you wouldn't think something as ordinary as the weather could intervene. But just then, a fat drop of rain slaps the ground between them. It's like the sky cleared its throat. You blink. Once. Twice. Another drop follows the first, landing squarely on Rinsook's shoulder with a soft pat. He doesn't flinch, but his jaw shifts slightly, just enough for you to wonder if he's annoyed or merely pretending not to be. Takamura's expression doesn't change at all. Of course it doesn't. That man has likely trained under waterfalls and slept through typhoons. But now the rhythm changes. What had been a silent standoff becomes suddenly fragile. A fluttering moment on the edge of something ancient and explosive, interrupted not by a blade, but by a raindrop. You look up. The sky is no longer just overcast. It has decided, quite decisively, that now is the moment to be dramatic. The clouds boil like ink in water. Thunder rumbles, faint, distant, but unmistakable. That one guy with the folding chair slowly collapses it and mutters something about how this always happens when he shows up for a duel. The duelists still haven't moved. They're locked in that odd state where pride won't let them be the first to sheath their swords, But nature doesn't really care who trained with which master. Your attention drifts, just for a moment, to the long path that led them here. Rinsook's reputation was a rising fire. He had won duel after duel across the provinces, known as the Windblade for how quickly he could end a match, some said before the opponent realized it had begun. But there were rumors, too. Whispers that he was too quick, too reckless, that he once laughed mid-swing. And that one fight in Kyushu where no body was ever found, only a sword, embedded in the gate of a burned-down tea-house. Then there was Takamura. Not flashy, not poetic, just relentless. Where Rinsook moved like a storm, Takamura was stone. A man who trained under 5 different masters and was once expelled from a temple for meditating too loudly. He'd been dueling since before Rinsook had his first shave. And he had never lost. Not once. Unless you counted that brief period when he tried to sell pickled radish on the side, which didn't go well. Despite their rivalry, the two had never faced each other until today. A day when the heavens, it seems, are having second thoughts. You glance at the officiant. He looks about as thrilled as a man asked to judge a haiku contest during a typhoon. His scroll, already damp at the edges, trembles in his hands. The imperial seal is starting to smear. Historians still argue whether this duel was part of a larger effort by the local daimyo to consolidate power, or just a glorified PR stunt to keep the population entertained and distracted from rice tax increases. Either way, you get the sense that no one planned for weather. More rain now. Not heavy yet, but persistent. Enough to darken the earth, to loosen the grit beneath the sandals of warriors. You notice Takamura shifts slightly, his heel catching in the softening soil. A flicker of irritation crosses his face. Rinsook takes a step forward. His blade still raised. It should be a powerful image, young fury surging ahead, but the moment is undercut by the comic squelch his sandal makes. A nearby observer stifles a laugh, turns it into a cough. Someone else whispers, "This is why we don't duel during the rainy season." No one disagrees. A fringe detail you overhear. Apparently, one of the duelists consulted a local astrologer who specifically said any day but today. Naturally, they ignored it. The swords lower. Not in surrender. Not yet, but like two actors caught between scenes, waiting for the curtain to rise again, or fall for good. And you? You're soaked. Not entirely uncomfortable, though. The air has a different feel to it now. Cooler. Calmer. Almost as if the coming storm has diluted the anger in the air. The kind of moment where a lesser man might say, "Maybe this isn't worth it." But samurai don't say things like that. Not out loud. Instead, they stand in the rain, dripping honor onto the dojo floor, waiting for someone, anyone, to decide what happens next. The paper must have been handmade. You can tell by the fibers, the way the ink bleeds into it just slightly, like veins in an old leaf. The official scroll lies unrolled on a lacquered board, weighed down at the corners by tiny jade turtles, their faces frozen in perpetually unimpressed expressions. You edge closer, careful not to step in the growing puddle that's decided to claim the entrance of the dojo. Imperial paperwork is never light reading, even when it's about violence. The duel, it turns out, had required a full 3 weeks of negotiation between the retainers of both samurai. You'd think settling a personal grudge might just take a grumble and a few witnesses. Not in Edo period bureaucracy. No, this had to go through an entire series of official channels, involving clan notaries, a scroll runner with impressive calves, and a very tired scribe named Hiroto who reportedly filed the wrong date twice. At the center of the scroll, in heavy brushwork, were the duel terms: weapons allowed, katana and wakizashi, no firearms, time of day, just past sun's rise, maximum onlookers, not to exceed 60, excluding birds, and the agreed list of disallowed words to shout mid-duel. Apparently, coward, mama's boy, and haiku fraud were considered too inflammatory. You learn that both combatants were required to sign with their personal seals. Rinsook's is an elaborate swirl that looks vaguely like a whirlpool devouring a lily. Takamura's is a sharp-edged crane, mid-dive. And though they signed in the same ink, the brushstrokes could not be more different, one impatient and jagged, the other steady enough to impress a calligrapher. A quirky aside? The duel was initially scheduled for a week earlier but had to be postponed because the officiant had double-booked himself to preside over a competitive bonsai printing contest in the neighboring province. Apparently, that also ended in disaster. Rain continues to tap gently on the scroll's edge, and a young page rushes to shield it with a reed mat, his hands trembling. This duel was meant to be official, sacred, and symbolic, approved by both clan leaders, witnessed by multiple retainers, and later copied into imperial archives where a bored monk would probably summarize it as two egos, lightly dampened. Historians still argue whether duels like this were truly meant to be fatal. Some believe they were demonstrations of restraint, opportunities to show the full extent of one's training without actual bloodshed. Others claim that behind the formalities, most of these ended in at least one funeral and several very poetic eulogies. You glance back at the duelists. They haven't moved much. The rain has darkened their clothing, made their topknots droop a little. Rainstorm blinks rapidly, either clearing water from his lashes or trying to resist a sneeze. Takamura's nose twitches slightly, which you interpret as disapproval toward the weather, the scroll, or possibly the youth of today. And yet, something about the scroll feels more dramatic than the swords. There's a finality in black ink that steel can't replicate. A duel ends in moments. But a document? That gets copied, cited, debated for generations. Even the jade turtles seem to understand this. Their little eyes glisten with raindrops in judgment. In another part of the grounds, you overhear an apprentice explaining the scroll's significance to a merchant's daughter. He's clearly embellishing, something about the ink being made from night-blooming flowers harvested during a lunar eclipse. She gasps appreciatively. You resist the urge to correct them. Let them have the magic. It's funny. You came here to see a sword fight. But now, all eyes are on a Saki scroll. Because that's where the fate of this duel really lies. Not in muscle, or form, or ancient grudges. But in the slow, steady seep of rain into parchment. You shift your weight slightly, the wooden floor beneath you damp now, the edges of your robe absorbing the story whether you want it to or not. You don't realize until you hear the wind change direction, but the duel, for now, is stalled. Not because of fear, not because of mercy, but because the world has decided it wants a moment of poetry before the violence. And so you wait. Everyone waits. Which is, ironically, the perfect time to reflect on something most people forget. Samurai didn't just train to kill. They trained to kill beautifully. You turn your gaze to the small cluster of students crouched beneath the eaves, holding their practice bakken close to their knees. They've been whispering for the last hour about whether Rainstorm uses the falling maple strike or that forbidden move from the scrolls of Mount Azuka. You remember hearing that one too. Supposedly it involves spinning so fast your opponent becomes emotionally confused. Samurai combat wasn't just about efficiency. It was a ritual, an aesthetic. Every motion, every pivot, every cut was supposed to be graceful. Like ink flowing on parchment. Or a fan unfolding. Or a cherry blossom caught in midair by a sword tip. And yes, that last one actually happened, if you believe the scrolls, and the one old guy who claims he saw it from a tree. Rainstorm trained in a style that emphasized speed and illusion. The Western Wind School. The kind that made opponents second-guess whether he had actually moved. Legend says his master made him chase falling leaves until he could catch 3 at once without bruising them. Or maybe it was just a metaphor. With martial arts, it's hard to tell. Takamura's training was of an entirely different flavor. He came from the crane line. A school obsessed with balance, restraint, and minimal movement. Where every unnecessary twitch was considered vulgar. Where masters used sticks to poke your ankles if you leaned even 1 inch too far forward. You can still see it in the way Takamura stands, upright, poised, every breath measured like he's sharing the oxygen with the ancestors. You begin to understand why this duel has captivated so many. It's not just the rivalry. It's the promise of contrast. The clash of philosophies. Fast versus precise. Wind versus stone. A haiku versus a ledger. A fringed detail catches your ear, an older samurai murmuring about a scroll he once read in a mountain temple. It claimed that the first duel in this region was fought using not swords, but fans dipped in ink. The goal wasn't to strike but to sting your opponent with the most elegant brushstroke. He sighs. They don't fight like that anymore, he says. Too much yelling. You look back at Rainstorm. His blade, still unsheathed, reflects the gray sky. But you notice he's subtly adjusting his stance, not to prepare for a strike, but to center his weight more evenly across the mud-slick ground. Takamura, meanwhile, hasn't budged. His stillness is so complete that a small beetle has taken refuge in the crook of his sleeve. Historians still argue whether samurai schools exaggerated their rituals to attract wealthier students. Some claim that a third of martial forms were designed more for impressive demonstrations at festivals than for actual battlefield use. Others insist that these elaborate motions weren't fluff, they were meditations, practice for death, or for knowing when to avoid it. And really, isn't that the point of all this? Not to die spectacularly, but to live with the illusion that you could choose? You let your eyes drift across the crowd again. A nobleman picks something from his teeth with the end of his fan. A boy in a straw hat chews dried persimmon. The page with the reed mat is now shielding the scroll and himself, huddled like a very determined mushroom. Still, the rain keeps falling. Soft, then steady. A rhythm that sounds oddly like a taiko drum played with feathers. No one knows what to do. The officials whisper. The duelists do not. Their swords remain drawn, but unmoving, as if frozen in some beautiful, impossible calligraphy stroke. One that can't be finished. And for a moment, no one wants it to be. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes. It's one of those sneezes that echoes, sharp, wet, and immediately regrettable. Several heads turn. A woman clutching an oil paper parasol hisses at her companion, "I told you not to eat pickled garlic before coming." He shrugs and looks like a man who has made peace with his own disgrace. But you? You're not distracted. You're listening. Not just with your ears, but your whole body. Because there's a kind of sound that moves through a place when two samurai are about to clash, even if they never do. It's not just the silence. It's what fills the silence. Gossip, ghost stories, nervous giggles, and the rustling of sleeves belonging to people who really shouldn't be here but couldn't stay away. You hear one of the apprentices whisper, "I heard Takamura's blade is haunted." Another one nods solemnly, "I heard Rinsuke doesn't sleep. He just stands by the river and sharpens his sword in the moonlight." This, of course, is nonsense. But wonderful nonsense. You remember that gossip is how legends are born, not from facts, but from fragments. Rinsuke once broke his toe during training and still finished the kata without missing a beat. Now, he's the man who doesn't feel pain. Takamura once refused sake at a banquet. Now, he doesn't eat, doesn't drink, only meditates and speaks to cranes. One merchant leans in to tell his companion that Rinsuke's sword is actually forged from a fallen star. Another says it's made from the bones of a drowned ronin. Someone else mutters that Takamura's technique was taught to him by a tengu, a mountain goblin with a fondness for disciplined warriors and inconvenient weather. And floating just above the chatter is another name. Kene. It comes like a breeze, unexpected, not spoken loudly, but enough to catch on the ears of those who know. The poetry instructor. The only woman both men admired, and lost. Historians still argue whether Kene left voluntarily or was pressured to disappear after the rivalry became dangerous. Some say she was banished by a court official worried about the drama. Others claim she chose solitude, tired of being the sword between two blades. You imagine her now, perhaps sipping tea in some mountain hut, watching the rain fall on her silkworms. Maybe she knows the duel is supposed to be today. Maybe she doesn't care. But here, her presence is felt like perfume long after the wearer has gone. Suddenly, thunder again, louder this time. The sky no longer hesitates. It opens like a cracked dam, and the rain goes from poetic to impolite in less than a minute. People scramble. Parasols unfurl. Sandals skid. Even the folding chair guy gives up entirely and just sits in the mud, arms crossed like a man who refuses to let dignity be weather-dependent. And still, Rinsuke and Takamura stand. Dripping. Silent. Neither willing to concede. Neither willing to break the illusion. You wonder how long they've practiced for this. Not just the duel, but the stillness. The presence. The ability to look like a painted scroll even when soaked to the bone. A fringe detail, a vendor nearby has started selling rain-soaked mochi balls, advertising them as authentic to the moment. They are not selling well. You inch closer to the perimeter of the field. A crow hops sideways along the fence, flapping once, shaking off water, unimpressed. Another thunderclap. This one rattles the roof tiles above you. Still, no one declares the duel over. Because who would dare? Honor is a slippery thing. Once unsheathed, like a blade, it's difficult to put away without using it. And yet, even the duelists must now feel the absurdity pressing in. Rain cascading from their chins. Fingers wrinkling from the cold. Fabric sagging with the weight of unfinished business. You begin to suspect that this duel, haunted by whispers, soaked in myth, and paused indefinitely, might be remembered longer than one that ended with blood. Because everyone loves a fight, but no one forgets a ghost story. You notice it slowly, how the entire crowd starts to tilt their heads at once. Not in unison, exactly, but in a kind of domino hesitation. Eyes upward, mouth slightly parted. It's the sound. The rain has changed. What was once a delicate patter now thuds with a steady, wet insistence, like a taiko drum being played with soggy rice cakes. And over it, the distant rumble of a low, growling sky. You look toward the horizon. The clouds are rolling in, not with speed, but with purpose. Heavy and muscled, dark as bruised silk. The kind of clouds that don't ask permission. The kind that arrive with the ancient, bone-deep reminder, nothing humans plan matters to the weather. It's not just rain anymore, it's a statement. Takamura's robes are soaked through. His crane embroidery, once crisp and dignified, now droops with tragic flair. His topknot has begun to sag slightly, and a droplet runs down the bridge of his nose, hesitates, then plummets like a monk falling off a wet rooftop. He does not blink. Of course he doesn't. Rinsook, meanwhile, has taken to shifting his weight back and forth, perhaps to keep warm, or perhaps to fight the urge to laugh. His lips twitch. Not quite a smirk. Not quite resignation. Just the kind of face a man makes when he realizes that the universe is being very funny at his expense. You catch fragments of conversation from the back of the gathering. One onlooker suggests building a temporary shelter so the duel can continue indoors. Another proposes waiting until the rain stops, which, judging by the sky, might be somewhere around next spring. An elderly woman mutters that this is all the fault of improper moon offerings last week. You consider agreeing, mostly because she's brandishing a dried fish like a pointer. A quirky detail? The official duel timer, a small, meticulously crafted incense clock, has quietly drowned. Its perfumed trail now curls into a muddy swirl near the officiant's sandals. He hasn't noticed. He's too busy trying to keep the ceremonial fan from collapsing like wet origami. Still, no one has officially called it off. Because calling off a duel isn't just saying let's try another day. It's ripping a hole in the tightly sewn fabric of honor, formality, and old grudges. And that fabric, once wet, is even harder to repair. Historians still argue whether rain ever stopped duels before. Some records suggest yes. Others claim that true warriors fought regardless of weather, blades slipping, sandals squelching, pride intact but clothing utterly humiliated. One scroll from the Edo archives even mentions a duel held during a snowstorm, ending not in death but mutual frostbite and lifelong resentment. You step back slightly, letting the rain hit your face. It's cold, sharp, and weirdly invigorating. You wonder if the duelists feel the same. Or if they've entered that strange, still place in the mind where all external sensations vanish. Lightning forks across the sky, brief and silent. A second later, thunder follows. Deep. Long. It seems to roll down from the heavens and settle in the pit of your stomach. It feels like a judgment. At last, someone moves. It's the officiant. His robes are sagging, his hat bent like a wilted flower, but he steps forward with the gravity of a man about to commit heresy. He raises the ceremonial fan, what's left of it, and opens his mouth. No one breathes. A pause. And then, postponed. The word strikes the crowd like a dropped gong. Not loud, but final. A dozen emotions ripple through the watchers. Relief, disappointment, confusion, hunger. Someone curses under their breath. Another person applauds sarcastically. The child with the straw hat throws a rock into a puddle and calls it dishonor. But you just exhale. Because sometimes, a cancelled duel says more than 100 clean deaths. Takamura turns first. He sheathes his sword in one smooth motion, the sound muffled by damp air. No words. No glance back. Just the soft, deliberate squelch of sandals as he walks. Away. Rinsook lingers. His blade still out, eyes fixed on the place where Takamura stood. Then, slowly, like a curtain closing on a play with no climax, he lowers the sword, wipes it on the hem of his sleeve, and slips it home. He looks up, and for just a moment, your eyes meet. And you know, this isn't over. Just postponed. So now what? The duel is off, formally, awkwardly, irrevocably off, and yet no one leaves. It's as if the crowd has gathered not just for combat, but for closure, and the sky has denied them both. People mill about like guests at a wedding where the bride fainted and the groom disappeared into the ocean. Everyone's trying to decide if they should stay, gossip, or go home and pretend none of it ever happened. You linger near the training yard, watching as Rensuk disappears into the back corridor of the dojo. No dramatic storm-off, no tantrum, no shattered bamboo. Just a man soaked in rain and frustration, carrying a sword that didn't get to taste anything today but humidity. And you wonder, what does a samurai do when he's denied his moment? Turns out, some of them get creative. Let's start with Takamura. Later that week, word spreads that he's been spotted outside the temple walls, at a small village shrine, performing quiet rituals for the weather kami. He doesn't blame the rain, not directly, but he's clearly seeking answers. Or perhaps an apology from the clouds. One day, a child passes him a paper umbrella with frogs painted on it. Takamura takes it, bows deeply, and uses it for the rest of the afternoon. The child becomes a local legend. And Rensuk? You'd think he'd storm off to find another duel, someone else to challenge, maybe start a bar fight with a Ronin just to shake the rust. But no! He shows up, unexpectedly, at the home of his old swordmaster, asking to borrow ink and paper. Within days, rumors float through the district that Rensuk, the same Rensuk known for breaking boards with his teeth, is now teaching calligraphy. You hear from one of his first students, a tofu merchant's daughter, that he's actually pretty good. His kanji 4 win makes you feel like your sleeves are flapping. And he doesn't talk about the duel. At all. There's an odd beauty in it. Two warriors, denied their moment of violence, slipping sideways into peace without quite meaning to. You start to realize something. Maybe this rainstorm didn't cancel a duel. Maybe it redirected 2 lives. A quirky detail that sticks with you. A few days after the non-duel, someone finds a small wooden sign nailed to a tree near the training grounds. On it, in perfect brushwork, are the words, "Sometimes the storm fights for you." No signature. But everyone knows who wrote it. Historians still argue whether duels interrupted by weather were legally considered complete. Some scholars say the mere act of drawing steel was enough to satisfy the ritual. Others insist that until blood was drawn, nothing counted. Still others point out that the spiritual weight of intention might outweigh the outcome, especially if the heavens intervened. Back in the village, the atmosphere has shifted. Life goes on, of course. Merchants haggle, children chase dragonflies, and tea is poured with precisely the same hesitation as always. But something lingers. A quiet undercurrent. Like the story is still unfolding, just in slower chapters. You hear a few people joking about samurai who can't duel without sunshine. One seller even starts offering rainproof honor cloaks at a stall, advertising them with the slogan, "For when your grudge must wait." He does good business, mostly with apprentices who think it's hilarious. But beneath the laughter is something else. A kind of reverence. Because it's one thing to face death with a blade in your hand. It's another to face disappointment and not let it rot you from the inside. You find yourself wondering, which is the harder fight? The one with steel? Or the one with stillness? The dojo remains open. The training resumes. But you notice that every now and then, someone, student, visitor, monk, walks quietly across the center of the yard. Just to stand in the spot where the duel didn't happen. As if to remind themselves of what almost was. It's a strange kind of morning. The sun, sheepish after several days of rain and retreat, finally makes a modest appearance. It peeks through tattered clouds like someone late to a performance that's already been cancelled. The air is thick with humidity and the scent of damp earth. Crickets, confused, begin chirping at the wrong time of day. You step onto the gravel path leading toward the training field, and it squelches. The duel is over, or rather, it never began, but that hasn't stopped anyone from showing up. Today, the training grounds are not a battleground, but a stage. A stage for whispers, side eyes, and post-event speculation. Dozens of townsfolk linger, wandering around as if waiting for an encore that no one promised. Children point to where Rensuk once stood. A scholar squints at the mud, claiming he can still see Takamura's sandal impression. He might be right. Or just hopeful. And then there's the crowd. Bigger than before, somehow. As though the cancellation of the duel has attracted more people than the duel itself ever could. Nobles in embroidered haori, their crests still gleaming despite the damp. Merchants with baskets of sweets shaped like tiny katana. Rice farmers with hands like bark, drawn in from the fields because, well, why not? One man sells souvenir fans painted with dramatic scenes of the duel that didn't happen. On one, Takamura deflects lightning with his blade. On another, Rinsuke is shown floating above the mud, untouched by weather. Historically inaccurate, sure, but undeniably stylish. Near the edge of the courtyard, someone is setting up a food cart. Miso skewers, sweet rice dumplings, fried octopus balls. You catch a whiff and your stomach remembers it has needs. Another cart, painted in gaudy blue and gold, blasts out an old ballad on a shakuhachi flute, slightly off-key but with tremendous enthusiasm. You overhear a conversation between two young monks debating whether the rain was divine intervention or simply atmospheric coincidence. One insists that the kami of storms disapproved of the violence. The other thinks someone offended a fox spirit. Neither has actual proof, but they argue with the confidence of drunk philosophers. And there, just behind the shrine lanterns, you see a group of older samurai gathered in a loose circle, gesturing with their fans and discussing back-in-my-day stories. One of them claims he once fought during a hailstorm and lost his opponent beneath a pile of ice. Another insists the best duels always happen at night, by moonlight, and only after both parties drank 3 cups of sake. You suspect embellishment, but you let them have it. Historians still argue whether public duels were more about community spectacle than personal vengeance. Some believe these events became pageants, a chance to reaffirm social order and provide catharsis. Others argue the opposite, that every duel, no matter how ceremonial, simmered with genuine danger just beneath the surface. But you're more interested in the energy today. The crowd isn't angry that the duel was called off. They're enchanted. Because the duel that didn't happen, it's become something else. A shared myth. A perfect maybe. People are already recounting their versions of it, how they almost saw blood, how Rinsuke nearly struck first, how Takamura surely would have countered with a move known only to temple masters and storks. Every version gets a little taller, a little stranger. Even the duelists, absent now, are becoming characters, detached from their real selves. They are no longer simply men. They are moments, suspended in amber. A quirky touch? One local artist has painted this scene entirely from memory. Except he's replaced the duelists with 2 koi fish circling each other in the mud. It sells within the hour. You sip warm tea from a borrowed cup and let the sounds of the crowd wash over you. Laughter, rain boots squelching, whispers of what could have been. It's odd, isn't it? Sometimes a cancelled fight leaves a louder echo than the clash of steel. Now that the rain has stopped and the duel is officially done, though never started, you find yourself oddly obsessed with something most spectators ignored: the rules. The ones nobody talks about unless a duel doesn't go as planned. The quiet rituals, obscure gestures, and wildly specific etiquette that govern how 2 men were allowed to try and murder each other with dignity. You wander toward the officiant's bench, still damp and unoccupied. A few scrolls lay half-curled beside a water-stained parasol. One, unraveling slightly in the wind, is written in brushstroke kanban so dense it might as well be a love letter to bureaucracy. Still, it's there you learn what the duel should have looked like, in theory. First, the bow. Not too deep, lest it suggest humility. Not too shallow, lest it suggest arrogance. And absolutely no eye contact during the bow, unless the duel was over a romantic dispute, in which case eye contact was encouraged, preferably with a dramatic sigh. Then the spacing, 15 paces, give or take, depending on terrain, rank, and whether the combatants were prone to spontaneous lunging. A small white stone was sometimes placed between them, meant to symbolize fate. If it shifted during the duel, it was taken as a sign. Of what, exactly, historians still argue. Weapons had to be declared in advance. Katana were standard. Wakizashi permitted. Tanto? Acceptable, but frowned upon for being too intimate. One eccentric duel decades ago even involved fans dipped in resin and glass shards. That one was banned afterward. And the shout, the kiai, had to come before the first strike, not during. Any yelling mid-swing was considered not only poor form but also bad luck. One scroll notes a duel ruined when a combatant shouted the wrong name. His opponent paused, confused, and the moment was lost. They ended up talking for 2 hours and later opened a sake shop together. There were even rules about footwear. Straw sandals were preferred. Leather-soled shoes were considered dishonorable, unless the ground was damp, in which case they were considered wise but shameful. You catch a whisper from a passing elder, complaining that duels today lack the elegance of old. Back then, if someone died, at least it happened in rhythm, he says. His friend nods solemnly and offers him a pickled plum. You try to imagine Rainstorm and Takamura performing the duel as prescribed. The bows. The precise breathing. The two slow, circling steps. The pause, like the moment before a poem's final line. You realize how absurdly choreographed it all is, and how impossibly human. The duel wasn't just a fight. It was a conversation. A negotiation with steel. Every block a reply. Every dodge a rebuttal. Every strike a sentence ending in blood, or not. A quirky aside, one regional rulebook suggests that if a duel was interrupted by animals, not uncommon in some provinces, it was to be postponed unless the animal chose a side. In that case, it was interpreted as a message from the gods. There's a painting somewhere of a cat sitting on a duelist's shoulder just before he declared victory. You step back from the officiant's bench, mind buzzing with details. Maybe the reason this cancelled duel has stuck with everyone is because the rules were ready. Everything was set. The tension wound so tight, the scrolls unrolled, the incense clock lit. Every step prepared. But the final act was stolen. Or spared. Historians argue that the ritual surrounding a duel was more important than its outcome. A proper beginning, even without an end, was still honorable. You believe it. Because right now, in this courtyard, muddy, brightened by stubborn sunlight, and filled with the rustle of post-storm robes, there's a strange kind of peace. Not from victory, but from obedience to form. The swords were ready. The rules were followed. The rain did the rest. It's almost funny now, how quiet it gets. Not in the peaceful, meditative way people imagine samurai battles to be. No. This is the sort of hush that follows a communal intake of breath, except no one ever exhales. Like the crowd is still waiting for something to happen, even though they know, deep down, that the event has already dissolved into puddles. The swords have been sheathed for hours. The officiant has packed up his soggy scrolls and gone home, probably to write a very polite report blaming unexpected celestial interference. The food carts are wheeling away one by one, their once steaming snacks now cold and vaguely disappointing. Even the souvenir fan guy has run out of koi-themed inventory. But the field? Still occupied. By memories. By tension. By two footprints in the mud that haven't quite filled with water yet. You find yourself drifting to the edge of that makeshift arena. Close enough to sense where it could have happened. Where it almost did. There's no marker, no line drawn in the soil, but your body knows. The hairs on your arms rise. Your breath slows. You're standing where the ki should have run out. The duelists are long gone, of course. But they've left traces. You spot a scrap of soaked silk caught on a branch, a piece of Rainstorm's sleeve, maybe? Or a discarded offering to the gods of martial discipline. A bent reed with the faintest slice through it. Nothing dramatic. Just a whisper of movement that now never happened. And in that space, just for a moment, you imagine the fight. You see Rainstorm move first. Fast, fluid, a blur of black cloth and speed. Takamura waits, still, absorbing the motion like a mountain absorbs wind. Then his counter, one, clean, perfect arc. Not even a step forward. Just a tilt of the shoulder and a flick of the blade. The crowd gasps. Someone screams. The blow lands. But you blink. And it's gone. The real silence is back. Not just absence of sound, but a full-bodied stillness. It crawls into your bones. It feels like respect. Historians still argue whether this specific duel had political undertones. Some think Rainstorm was meant to lose, to humble his faction, to appease a senior lord. Others insist that Takamura would have thrown the match, if only to retire undefeated on a technicality. But when the sky broke open, none of that mattered. Strategy dissolved with the mud. You hear footsteps behind you. A young apprentice walks past, eyes wide, arms folded into his sleeves. He stops near where you're standing and bows, not to you, not to anyone, just to the space. Then he walks on. You feel like bowing, too. Not because of who stood here, but because of who didn't fall. And in the pause, this breathing, living moment where no blades flash and no blood darkens the soil, you finally understand something. Silence can be louder than violence. You remember something someone said earlier. Maybe it was a merchant or a monk. Maybe you made it up in the haze of the moment. But it went something like this. Only the best swords know when not to cut. A quirky footnote from a local record. An anonymous poem was nailed to a tree near the field the next morning. No one saw who wrote it, but the paper was folded with care, and the ink had clearly dried before the rain came. It read, "Steel sleeps in scabbard. Thunder bows to quiet men. Rain ends the duel first. You don't take a picture. You just read it. Twice. And then walk away, letting the silence carry it into memory. The rain stops, eventually. Not all at once, of course. It trickles to a finish the way an old man tells stories, slowly, with plenty of pauses, and only after repeating itself several times. The clouds thin out. Sunlight breaks through in odd, apologetic slants, illuminating puddles like they're trying to be forgiven for existing. You step over one such puddle now, the water catching your reflection for a moment. You look tired. Or maybe just contemplative. That's what happens when you come for a sword fight and leave with a meditation. The duel is over. Technically it never happened, but the aftermath is messier than anyone expected. And the two men at the heart of it? They're dealing with it in their own, very different ways. You hear that Rainstorm hasn't spoken to anyone since that day. Not even his students. He's still at the dojo, though. Still practices in the early morning, when the mist rises and the birds haven't quite remembered how to be noisy yet. They say he swings his blade in complete silence now. No grunts, no ki. Just movement. Like wind rehearsing a memory it no longer believes in. Then there's Takamura. He vanished for a week after the storm. Some thought he'd retired. Others whispered he'd gone to finish the duel in secret, alone, against a tree, or a rock shaped like Rainstorm. But then he reappeared. At a shrine. In formal robes. Lighting incense. Not for a funeral, but for a cleansing. A priest tells you later, he wanted to wash the weight from his blade, even if it hadn't tasted blood. There's a debate now, among those who watched. Who won the duel? The ones who support Rainstorm say he showed restraint. He could have demanded a rematch, could have struck in spite of the rain. But he didn't. He waited. Walked away. That, they say, was strength. The ones who favor Takamura say it was always his to lose. That he knew this. That his stillness wasn't hesitation, but mastery. That only someone who had nothing left to prove could stand so long in the rain and not flinch. Historians still argue if either interpretation holds water. Some scrolls frame the duel as an omen, a transition point between old and new schools of swordplay. Others brush it off as a non-event, a soggy footnote in an otherwise blood-soaked century. But privately? Many agree, something changed that day. A quirky little incident makes the rounds. A few days after the duel that wasn't, a local poet performs in the market square. She recites a piece about two swords kissed by rain. It's a bit overwrought, but the crowd eats it up. Rainstorm passes by during the recital. He doesn't stop, but someone swears they saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Just once. You pause beneath a tree near the training yard. The mud here has dried slightly, cracking into quiet little maps. You draw a line through one with your sandal, nothing important, just a meandering groove. And you wonder, what happens to a samurai's purpose when the sword stays clean? When the enemy isn't cut down, but simply never arrives? When the audience disperses with full hearts but no climax? You don't have the answer, but you suspect neither do they. Takamura has taken up teaching again, but in smaller groups now. Less instruction, more discussion. Sometimes he brings out his blade, unsheathes it just enough to catch the light, and says, "Not every sword has to be fed." And Rainstorm? Still writing. His brushwork's gotten better. His students say he's experimenting with cursive kana now, which is either a sign of spiritual evolution or a midlife crisis. But he looks calmer. Or maybe just tired of being fast. The dojo? It's become a place of pilgrimage. Not for warriors, but for poets. For artists. For the curious. Visitors stop by to walk the perimeter of the old training field and imagine what could have been. Children reenact the duel in the mud, complete with dramatic falls and exaggerated screams. One boy insists on playing the rain. You smile at that. Because some stories don't need a final strike to become unforgettable. They just need a pause. A silence. And two men willing to stand in it. When a duel is cancelled, people expect the tension to vanish with it. It doesn't. It lingers, like the scent of incense long after it's burned away. It clings to the places where things almost happened. To the sidelong glances. To the questions no one dares to ask too directly, in case it summons answers no one really wants. You stroll through the village a few days after the rain, and everything seems the same. But it isn't. There's something different in the way people talk about honor now, less like a rulebook, more like a riddle. Less about dying properly, more about living strangely. A merchant's son draws 2 swords in the dirt and says he wants to be a warrior poet now. A washerwoman swears her rice cakes have improved since watching Takamura stand in the rain. She claims the stillness gave her clarity. You don't argue. You pass a potter shaping clay, and he's muttering something about balance. When pressed, he admits he's trying to capture the feeling of that non-duel, the suspended moment where everything was waiting to break, but never did. He molds 2 figures, one rigid, one in mid-motion, facing each other with nothing between them but space. Like a comma, he says. Not an end. Just a breath. And yet, for Rensuke and Takamura, that breath still weighs heavy. You hear that Rensuke's been walking the hills outside the village at dawn, practicing alone. No longer rehearsing attacks, now he's perfecting pauses. One morning, a monk spots him watching a spider rebuild its web in the wet grass. Rensuke doesn't move for nearly half an hour. Takamura, meanwhile, visits shrines. Often. Sometimes to offer incense. Sometimes to just sit and listen to the wind. Someone said he's begun composing poems again, short ones, always anonymous. One was found tied to a tree by the temple gates. We stood in still rain. Not for war, but for waiting. A blade without breath. It's unsigned, but the ink strokes look familiar. Historians still argue whether the cultural ripple of the duel that wasn't shaped policy, art, or training across the region. Some schools reportedly added a pause kata to their routines, teaching students how to hold a strike forever without finishing it. Others banned duels entirely, citing meteorological vulnerability as a growing concern. That last one didn't catch on. A fringe rumor makes its rounds that a 3rd duel had been proposed. Secret. Off the record. Just the 2 of them. No ceremony, no witnesses, no scrolls or incense clocks. Just resolve, in the woods, far from politics and puddles. But the rumor fizzled. Not because no one believed it, but because everyone hoped it wasn't true. Because something about not fighting had become more powerful than any clash of steel ever could. You sit by a stream now, watching a leaf tumble along the surface. It spins and bumps, dodging stones, flipping once, twice, then finally drifting out of sight. It reminds you of Rensuke's old style, chaotic grace. You glance at your own reflection and wonder, how many people came to watch a fight, and left questioning the meaning of it all? It's not that the duel didn't matter. It's that its absence left a larger space to think in. Like a garden path that ends suddenly, not because it's unfinished, but because it wants you to stop walking. A quirky little footnote you overhear at the market. The dojo is offering new lessons, not just in swordplay, but in timing. One student explains it like this: it's not about when to strike. It's about knowing when the world doesn't need you to. You nod. Because deep down, everyone who is there knows what really happened. There was no winner. There was no loser. But something changed. And that might be the most honorable cut of all. You think, perhaps, it would have been easier if someone had just swung first. If the blades had clashed. If one had fallen. If the story had ended cleanly, with gasps and blood and a lesson carved neatly into history. That's the kind of ending people know what to do with. That's how most samurai stories go. But this soggy standstill of half-spoken gestures and unclaimed tension? This lives in people's heads. You pass 2 farmers arguing near a bridge, not about rice yields or tax burdens, but about the duel. One insists Rensuke blinked first. The other claims Takamura's left foot slipped a hairbreadth and no one noticed. Neither of them was actually at the dojo that day. At a nearby inn, you overhear a drunken traveler claim that he saw the duel. They clashed 10 times before the storm broke, he insists, slamming down his cup. The sky wept for their skill. His companions are too entertained to challenge the story. Even among the truth-tellers, the tale keeps changing. You can't blame them. When a moment is left unfinished, the imagination fills it in. The local scrollmaker has started taking commissions for illustrated retellings. Every version is different. In one, Rensuke's blade hums with spiritual energy. In another, Takamura draws so fast he cuts the rain in half. One features a talking frog referee. It sells out immediately. Even children now play the duel. But they don't use sticks for swords. They use their eyes. They They stand 10 paces apart and just look at each other. First one to laugh, loses. It's ridiculous. It's beautiful. And the duelists? They remain curiously absent. Not hiding. Just drifting elsewhere. Takamura, you learn, has begun walking the country roads in plain clothes, introducing himself as a calligraphy tutor. No sword on his hip. Just a brush. Sometimes, when students ask about the duel, he shrugs and says, "What duel?" Then he smiles like a man who's forgotten nothing. Rinsuke has reportedly joined a traveling kabuki troupe, not as a performer, but as a movement consultant. "Teach them how to move like swords?" the director asked. "No," Rinsuke replied, "I'll teach them how to move like they almost strike." A woman on a ferry claims she saw them both, separately, at the same shrine. Hours apart. Each left an offering. Each took a stone from the same pile. Neither knew the other had been there. Historians still argue whether the cultural fascination with this Rainstorm duel marks the beginning of what they call the era of almost. A short period where restraint became more revered than action, where unspent energy was considered a kind of enlightenment. It didn't last long, but it left a mark. There's even a new tea ceremony, inspired by the duel. You pour, but never drink. You hold the cup, feel the warmth, and bow to the steam instead of sipping. It's deeply unpopular, but oddly moving. A French philosopher has taken this all to its natural extreme. He claims that perhaps life is better when things don't finish. That perhaps the most meaningful experiences are the ones that never resolve. He's currently writing a book titled The Grace of the Unhappened. No one's sure if he'll ever finish it. You smile, because you finally understand something. This duel, the one that slipped through the fingers of history, didn't fail. It evolved. It became a reflection. A mirror held up to all the times we almost said what needed saying. Almost changed our path. Almost swung. Almost paused. A quirky moment. You see an old man teaching a young girl how to bow, not for combat, but for silence. He says, "There is strength in choosing stillness." She nods, then promptly trips over a frog. He bows to the frog. The rain is long gone now, but its echo remains, in stone, in story, in stillness. And the field where it all happened? No plaque. No monument. Just two faint depressions in the dirt. And the memory of blades that might have met. You return to the training yard, not because there's a new duel, but because you want to see what remains. The earth is drier now. The mud has hardened into pale, cracked patches, like a reptile shedding its skin. The footprints are almost gone, scuffed up by time and weather, though if you squint, you can still see a vague suggestion of where Takamura stood. Perfect posture, unwavering. And to the left, a shallower impression, likely Rinsuke's, always moving, even when standing still. No banners hang anymore. No officials. No incense clocks or scrolls held down by jade turtles. Just quiet. Birds have returned. So have weeds. And yet, something lingers, less like a ghost, more like a vibration in the soil. You sit beneath a tree and close your eyes. For a moment, you swear you can still hear rain hitting robes, slow breathing, the unsaid yes that never turned into a strike. You're not alone. Others come, too. Pilgrims of the almost. A young man kneels and prays, not to win a duel, but to understand one. An elderly woman pours tea on the ground and says it's for what didn't happen. A child runs the length of the yard with a stick, pauses, raises it to the wind, and bows. No one tells him to stop. A group of traveling monks has added this spot to their walking circuit. They chant not for the dead, but for the peacefully postponed. You watch them bow once, then leave a single white stone in the middle of the yard. No words. Just that. And you? You sit longer than you meant to. You think about all the fights you didn't finish. The things you wanted to say and didn't. The arguments you avoided. The pride you carried. The weight of the decision never made. Historians still argue what this all means. Was the duel a failure of tradition or a triumph of restraint? Did it weaken the samurai image, or elevate it? A respected scholar once said, "What we avoid defines us more than what we accomplish." Another countered, "No, that's just laziness wearing a robe." But the people? The ordinary people? They remember. They remember that two blades were drawn. That breath was held. That the sky, in all its thundering finality, chose stillness over steel. A quirky ripple from this? Local sword schools now include weather training. Yes, really. Students must practice kata in drizzle, wind, and yes, even with buckets randomly dumped on them mid-swing. One dojo claims their pupils are 100% more storm-resistant. Another simply says, "Our best move? Waiting." Rinsuke and Takamura still haven't spoken publicly, but word drifts that they write letters now, not to each other, but to themselves. Quiet reflections. One letter from Takamura was found, half buried under a cedar tree. "I drew the sword to test the world." The rain answered first. There's no record of who found it, but copies now circulate in tea houses like secret talismans. And you wonder, did they need the fight? Or did they find something better in the absence? You walk a slow circle around the yard, not reenacting the duel, just tracing its outline, like walking the border of a dream you once had but can't quite retell. At the far edge, a small, freshly planted tree bends in the wind. A note is tied to it, barely legible. Even the fiercest blade cannot cut a raindrop. You smile, not because it's clever, but because it's true. The odd thing is, no one really knows who suggested the poetry readings. Maybe it started as a joke, a merchant poking fun at the silent, soggy showdown by quoting old haiku. Maybe it was an apprentice with too much imagination and too little sword skill. Or maybe it was inevitable. When steel fails to draw blood, words always step in. Now, once a week, people gather near the field with lanterns and tatami mats, and they read. Not just poems either, short tales, reflections, even awkward letters never sent. It's become a tradition. Duel night, they call it, with just enough irony to keep it charming. You attend one. The sun has dipped low, painting the clouds in melted persimmon. Crickets chirp lazily. A woman stands, clears her throat, and recites a verse. Two men, one storm. Not rivals, but mirrors. Even thunder bows. The crowd claps softly, like rainfall on roof tiles. A boy goes next. He doesn't read. He pantomimes the duel, first Rinsuke's rush, then Takamura's quiet parry, and ends with both standing still while he pours a bucket of water over his own head. He bows. Everyone laughs. Everyone understands. And so the story grows. Not with blood, but with voices. A merchant composes a series of woodblock prints, the 20 imagined endings of the duel. One shows both men vanishing into mist. Another, they both throw their swords and open a noodle stand. The bestseller? The one where they both strike at once and their blades turn to sakura petals. Critics call it ridiculously beautiful. Children call it the cool one. You hear, through a string of second-hand sources, that Rinsuke saw it. Said nothing. Just traced the falling petals with his finger and nodded once. Takamura, meanwhile, was reportedly seen in a small village schoolhouse, helping children paint their names with brushes. He taught them not how to write quickly, but how to pause. To lift the brush. To let the silence between strokes speak, too. Historians still argue if this movement, this still blade revival, as some call it, is legitimate martial philosophy or just romantic nonsense. One scholar scoffs, "What use is a warrior who doesn't fight?" Another replies, "What use is one who only fights?" But beyond academia, people are changing. A village that once glorified vengeance now holds ceremonies for reconciliation. Scribes pen stories where rivals sit under plum trees and don't duel. A new proverb appears in conversation, "Don't cut what the rain can calm." A quirky byproduct of this peaceful momentum? The local swordsmith has begun forging decorative blades, blunt, engraved, ceremonial. Not for battle, but for memory. He calls them rain swords. They sell out faster than anything he's ever made. And you? You return to the courtyard one quiet morning, tea in hand, and sit where the duelists once stood. You close your eyes. No crowd. No thunder. Just wind in the trees. And in your mind, you hear it all over again. The moment before action. The beauty of restraint. The choice that echoed longer than steel ever could. You wander through the village now as if inside a story still being written. The tale of the duel that wasn't has taken on a life so vivid, so oddly contagious, that it's become difficult to tell where fact ends and embellishment begins. And perhaps, no one really wants to. Every doorway has a version. Every market stall hums with its own retelling. It's no longer just about Takamura and Rinsuke. It's about something bigger, a legend shared like a cup of tea passed from hand to hand, growing warmer with every telling. You stop at a paper shop where new prints hang proudly outside. One shows the two samurai standing under the rain, swords drawn, their faces hidden by conical straw hats. The sky above them is a swirl of calligraphy strokes. It's unsigned, but you've seen that style before. Rinsook's brush, unmistakably. Rumor says he submitted it under the pseudonym Kazenoshita, Wind Beneath. You smile. If true, it means he's learned to finish something without needing to win. Takamura, meanwhile, is said to be tending a garden outside the village. He doesn't hide, but he doesn't invite attention either. A traveler described him kneeling in the soil, pruning his chrysanthemums with the same precision he once reserved for blades. He trims them like apologies, the traveler said. Like every cut must mean something. At the edge of the village, schoolchildren act out the duel once a month in a tiny clearing. No steel, no script. Just two kids standing still as their classmates chant who will move first. The answer is always no one, and the applause is real. A fringe curiosity spreads too. Some couples now perform a version of the duel at their weddings. Not with weapons, but with glances. A silent minute of eye contact, unspeaking, to honor the idea that love, like restraint, requires stillness, patience, and a touch of the absurd. Historians still argue whether this transformation, this flood of myth and mimicry, dilutes the truth of what happened. Was it still a samurai moment if it became art? Was it still a duel if it never cut? But that's the power of the story. It refuses to stay inside its borders. It leaks, gracefully, into gardens and schoolyards and late-night poetry. A quirky little update in a regional gazette notes that a monk has built a tiny shrine on the spot. Just a stone bench under a slatted roof. No offerings required. On a plaque above the bench, carved in simple kanji, are 3 words: stand, wait, breathe. And so people do. Travelers rest there, not to ask for miracles, but to remember that waiting is its own kind of act. You sit beside the bench now, watching a breeze ripple through the tall grass. For all the noise, for all the retellings, this is what endures: 2 men, 2 swords, and the rain that refused to choose. No battle, no victor, only presence. And you wonder, how many other storms in history interrupted something awful before it began? How many legends do we forget because they didn't end in fire? Here, the legend didn't need to burn. It needed to pause. And somehow, in that pause, it lit a gentler flame. There's a statue now. You didn't expect it, no one really did, but someone commissioned it, and the village elders approved it, and now it stands near the old training yard where the rain rewrote everything. It's not grand. No dramatic poses or exaggerated musculature. Just 2 figures carved from dark stone, standing apart, swords sheathed, heads slightly bowed. Between them, a thin copper line curves across the base, and laid to mark the distance they never cross. A simple plaque reads, "In stillness, everything was decided." People come from far beyond the province to see it. Pilgrims, tourists, scholars, even martial artists from other schools. They walk the gravel paths in quiet circles, bow to the statues, leave offerings of folded paper cranes, and sometimes whisper confessions into the wind between the 2 stone men. The site has become something more than a monument. It's a threshold. A place where unresolved things go rest. One day, you watch a woman arrive with her young son. She kneels before the statues and removes a small object from her satchel, 2 toy swords, carefully carved and painted. She places them gently at the feet of the statues, then stands and whispers something to her son. He nods solemnly. You don't hear the words, but you know what they mean. Something about choosing peace. Something about what strength really looks like. In nearby towns, the duel is taught in schools, but not as a battle. As a turning point. Children learn about the rain, the pause, the refusal to let old anger carry the day. They draw pictures of it. Always the same image. 2 figures, facing each other, unmoving, while great arcs of rain connect sky to earth like threads from a loom. You hear someone suggest that Takamura and Rensook should return and reenact the duel. The idea is dismissed instantly. To restage it would undo it, a poet says. It was perfect because it didn't happen. Historians still argue whether the duel's cancellation was destiny, accident, or subconscious design. Was the storm a sign? Were the duelists relieved? Did they both see the rain and feel, if only for a flicker, a way out? No one knows. Not even the 2 men, probably. And if they do, they're not telling. What you do know is this: the space between them, that charged, humming silence, was filled with everything they couldn't say. Old rivalries. Unspoken respect. Echoes of a woman named Kene. The weight of lineage. The ache of living up to legends. And in the end, they let the rain speak. A quirky development, a traveling theater troupe has begun performing a dramatized version of the Duel. But it's silent. 45 minutes of two actors slowly walking in a circle under an artificial drizzle, never striking. The audience sits in hushed awe. One reviewer called it the loudest quiet I've ever heard. And you? You start dreaming about the Duel. Not the version that happened, but all the versions that didn't. You see 1,000 outcomes, blades clashing, one man falling, both men falling, or embracing, or vanishing into mist. But each time, the dream ends the same way, with rain, soft and cold, washing everything clean. The myth grows. It outlives scrolls, outpaces records. It settles into the collective memory like an old lullaby, something you hum without knowing where you learned it. And through it all, the field remains unchanged. Just earth, sky, and the ghosts of two men who almost fought. Or maybe did, in a way no sword can measure. Because some duels are never won. They are simply endured. You come back one evening, long after the crowds have thinned and the last paper lantern has been taken down. The training yard is empty now, reclaimed by wind and weeds. A few fireflies drift lazily through the dusky air, blinking like punctuation marks in a story that refuses to end. You sit on the low stone ledge where the officials once rested, and for a long time, you don't think about swords at all. You think about waiting, about patience, about the tension in a held breath, and the strange quiet that settles into your bones when you expect a storm, and none arrives. The village is quieter than it was in the days after the Duel that wasn't. The fansellers have gone. The poets have moved on to other obsessions. The legend remains, but it's no longer buzzing. It hums, low and steady, like a bell that was struck once and keeps vibrating through time. People don't perform it now. They live around it, as though the story has taken root, not in memory, but in practice. A samurai from another province arrives one day, sword at his hip, shoulders high with pride. He demands a duel from a local warrior, insisting on tradition, form, vengeance for some ancient insult. But the local bows and says softly, "I follow the rain now." The stranger doesn't understand. He leaves, unsettled. And something in him changes. You pass a group of teenagers practicing sword forms near the field, their movements graceful but calm. They don't shout. They don't clash. One girl pauses mid-strike and just holds it. A teacher nods. "Feel that?" he asks. That's the strike that chose not to happen. They bow and begin again, slower. A merchant has begun selling miniature scrolls with excerpts from imagined letters between Takamura and Rensuke. They're clearly fictional, but buyers don't care. The bestseller? A tiny slip of parchment that reads, "Brother, in another reign, perhaps." Someone has folded it into a paper crane and placed it beneath the statue. Historians still argue over the legacy of the Duel. Some say it marks the decline of sword culture, the softening of the warrior class. Others argue it was the peak of samurai philosophy, a moment when discipline and clarity triumphed over ego. One essay calls it the perfect restraint. Another calls it a beautifully missed opportunity. They both miss the point. Because the people who were there, who stood beneath that sky, who watched and waited and saw no blood, no fall, no victory, they know what it really was. It was a mirror. A moment held up to everyone watching, saying, "This is what power looks like when it chooses not to strike." A quirky shift. Local courtship rituals have changed. Now, when someone proposes marriage, they don't kneel. They stand across from their beloved, 10 paces apart, and wait. If the other steps forward first, the answer is yes. If both wait too long, they simply bow and try again next week. It's oddly romantic. Statistically confusing, but romantic. And now you're here again, under a sky beginning to bruise purple at the edges, watching the wind comb through the grass. A place that once waited for violence is now a sanctuary for thought. You reach into your satchel and remove a small slip of paper. You've written something, though you're not sure why. You walk to the center of the yard, kneel slowly, and press the paper into the dirt. It reads, "I don't need the answer anymore." Then you rise, brush off your hands, and leave the field behind you. Not because the story is finished, but because you've decided to stop adding to it. And so it lingers. Not in the way most stories do, not carved into stone or sung in grand halls, but like mist that returns each morning, wrapping the village in memories so softly no one feels its weight until they try to leave it behind. The tale of the cancelled duel has become something different now. Not a cautionary tale. Not a myth of tragedy or glory. But a kind of invitation. An invitation to pause. To listen. To step back when the world expects you to step forward. The villagers no longer gather weekly. The field no longer draws poets by the dozen. But people still come. Quietly. Alone or in pairs. They bring no offerings. They leave no trace. They simply stand, sometimes in silence, sometimes with a soft exhale, and feel the breath of a moment that changed without breaking. You hear that Rainstorm has moved inland, to a quiet town where he teaches writing under the name Mori. His students say he's calm, precise, and very, very funny when he wants to be. His most recent lesson? A kanji 4 cut drawn so gently, it looked like a feather falling. Takamura now tends the shrine garden full-time. He doesn't speak of the duel. But once, a traveler asked him what the hardest strike to master was. He replied, "The one you never deliver." The path to the field has grown soft with moss. No sign marks it. No fence surrounds it. But even now, travelers stumble upon it and stop. They look around, feel something in the air, and instinctively lower their voices. Some sense the history. Others just feel calm. A quirky note in a weather almanac from a nearby province mentions the storm that halted the duel. It describes the rainfall as timely, then adds, "Some say the sky bowed that day, and did not rise angry again." Historians will debate it forever, of course. They'll write papers, publish books, argue about whether it was surrender or evolution. But none of them were there. None of them felt the pressure of expectation melt into the gentle hush of understanding. And as for you? You return to that field once more, not to witness a duel, but to feel what remains. The grass brushes your ankles. The breeze tugs at your sleeves. You stand where they stood, 10 paces apart, your shadow falling halfway between, and you whisper thank you. Not for what happened, but for what didn't. Because some of the strongest echoes come from the loudest silences. Some victories are won. They're withheld. And now, the rain has stopped. The blades are long since sheathed. The crowds have gone. And the story, so strange, so still, so unfinished, fades gently from view like the last light at dusk. You feel it in your breath now. Slower. Deeper. The weight of tension released. The comfort of a choice not made. That old field, mud-slicked, memory-soaked, is no longer a battlefield. It's a place where peace settled itself like morning mist and refused to move. The duel never happened. And yet, somehow, you saw everything. 2 lives. 2 paths. Dozens of possible endings. All of them held in suspension by a single downpour. You begin to drift now. Your thoughts softening, like footsteps in moss. Let the silence between words stretch a little longer. Let the air around you wrap you in stillness. There is no lesson here, no moral wrapped in metaphor. Just a pause. A held breath. A moment where the blade might have moved, and didn't. And that, in itself, is enough. So rest now. The rain has passed. The swords are quiet. And the story, like sleep, asks nothing more of you. Sweet dreams.